I did say that. I don't know if I'm gonna do it on Saturday. Just one time. Just
Ooh. All right, let me send out the stream. Stream's out. Should be up. All right. Okay, so we're back. I know everyone's really stoked about that. So we have 4 weeks left. We would have like literally 16 sessions, but I think 16 or 17, something like that. But we have President's Day off, no, MLK Day for some reason, which kind of throws it off a little bit. So we're not done until the 28th, that Monday. We're trying to find out from Jason what day our actual presentations are. If it's that Monday, we're doing it here and having that big, you know, shindig where everyone shows up and is super happy that they're done and stuff. Or, what? I don't know that yet. But, I'm going to figure it out. The point is, we're really close to the end. We're very, very close. You can taste it, right? You're right there. So, the last month here of class, what we're going to be doing is, partial lessons for the most part. This week, the rest of this week, so we'll review a bit today and then do our projects. Saturday, I really have no idea what you're going to be doing. Probably mostly projects since Daniel's going to be here. I don't know if he's got a plan for teaching you anything or what. That's really up to him and JJ and all them, so I'm not sure. Next week, we're going to start talking about some data structure algorithm stuff for about half the class. Then we'll work on projects, and then the weeks following that, it's just projects. So there's like some minor busy work we have to do with like the career stuff and all that. But the reality is it's just pretty much projects from here on out. So with that in mind, I slacked out earlier that the first deliverable will be due next Monday, the 7th. And that's going to be an overview of your application and why you feel it's valuable. You know, what does it bring to the table? A nice set of your screen-by-screen design or your flow or something like that to give us an idea of what it's going to look like, how it's going to work. A nice breakdown of your roles as group members, your schedule for the completion of various tasks as best you can do. I mean, it's a tall order. And then a screenshot or a link to something like a Jira board or a Trello board or some project management tool you're going to use to kind of manage this. Now, if you actually use that after the fact, I don't know. I guess I won't know. But you should at least have a link to one. I do recommend you try to use it because they are valuable tools. Even if you don't stay up to date with them religiously, it's nice to see what you have ahead of you, and if someone's working on their own and they're like, oh, I'm getting stuff done, what can I work on? It's all there, right? So they can just kind of pick something from the queue and go. Now, remember, my advice there is get all of your core functionality laid out in these nice, simple tasks, just a very basic functionality, and get that done as soon as you can. Like, get that core functionality done as soon as you can, and make that core functionality should be perfect, right? It should be amazing. It should look good. It doesn't have to do a lot. It should just be the very basic essence of what your app is supposed to be. And then when you're done with that, hopefully you have another 2 weeks left that you can work on this thing and just add awesome features and just make it even more robust. Add things like Travis and automatic deployment and unit tests and all the things that I think are really going to bring a lot of value that the recruiters won't expect. To be completely honest, you can make a really great app that can do a lot of stuff, but I think especially for the larger companies, if you go in with this robust app with a bunch of testing and, you know, automatic build pipelines and the stuff that really makes you more productive as a developer, and you know, you start taking the boilerplate crap out of it and automating it away, like those are really valuable skills that I think are going to impress people more than just your raw app. So focusing on those if you have time is also going to be extremely helpful. So yeah, so today I honestly don't have a lesson plan. I have no idea what we're supposed to do. So I'm going to leave it open to you guys. Whatever you want to review, we'll review for as long as we feel like it's necessary, and then we will work on projects. So, Jaime said he wanted to see Redux some more. There are other people who are interested in seeing more Redux. We'll go over some more Redux. It's also out there that I could show TypeScript eventually. We have plenty of time. So if we don't cover it today, if we don't want to cover it today, it's fine. In one of the other classes, when we just kind of have time to kill, I'll maybe do like a 35 to 45 minute presentation. Here's how we can add Redux to our TypeScript to our like React Redux app, and all that kind of stuff. And if you want to watch it, you can. If you don't, you can go work on your projects, whatever. Same thing kind of today. What was that? Oh, you liked it? Yeah, I have a podcast I was on about TypeScript too. It was pretty fun. So if you're interested in that, I can send you the link. It's a good podcast, I think. I haven't listened to very much of the other shows, but I'm trying to because I feel bad, right? You're on it. Then you see the people and they're like, hey, have you listened to it? And you're like, yeah, totally, dude. And you didn't actually, so I feel bad. Anyway, so we're going to cover a little bit of Redux today. I'll leave it open to you. If your group does not care about seeing this, by all means, go ahead and go work on your project. Really, this time is yours, and this isn't even really a planned out week, but I think it'll be good to see a little bit more. So this is our app from last time. You can pull the source files out of our GitLab repo. There's a React Redux example folder with a source folder in it. If you just create React app and dump that source folder in, you're pretty much where we need to be. The only difference is you need to install some stuff here inside of your package.json. And that is your React Redux and Redux. Basically, that's it. And you're good to go. So eventually we can add React Router DOM and all that fun stuff too to make it even more robust. But before we start, any questions on anything? Any quick questions I can answer about the class or anything going on? Your last homework, I think, is due for Saturday. Right, Stephanie or Chris? Yeah, that's your last homework. There's another optional one, I think. But who's going to do that? Let's be real. It's there. You can do it if you would like. I forget what it's on. It might be on Java, so in which case I don't expect anyone to do it. Yeah, so last homework is due Saturday, and then you guys are all projects the rest of the way out. So any questions on anything? Cool. Okay, so who can tell me, does anyone remember what the provider component is here in my index.js? What the hell? Okay, that was exciting. So we have this provider component. What is that? Does anyone remember?
It has to be around everything. It's got to be the most root element, I think.
Has to, yep, it does. It doesn't have to, it doesn't make sense not to be.
I don't know what it does.
So basically what it allows us to do is wrap our components in this special connect function so we can just pass it the Redux store without actually passing the Redux store. It's what's called a higher order component, where basically you take one component, you put it in another component, and that exterior component does some magical stuff with it for you. So that's why we need it. We need it to basically hook up the plumbing of Redux. So if we remember our store, when you actually import in Redux, you can create a reducer, which takes in the state and an action, and you can create the store with that reducer. Now, reducer is just a function, right? Pure function. What's a pure function? Always returns the same results, right? It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the input parameters. It doesn't change anything, any state in your app or anything like that. Well, okay, it does technically, but it doesn't implicitly change anything that you wouldn't expect, right? You put something in, you get something out. That's all it does. So we have a reducer function, which just changes our state or returns a new state. It doesn't actually change the state. It returns a new version of the state. And we pass it into our create store function, and we get our store. We can export that, and now we have a valid store, right? So to build the store, everything we're going to need with our Redux, we have our actions, which right now are just very simple strings that I have in constants. We have our reducer, which we basically use to determine what actions are being invoked and what has to change in state because of those actions. And then we have our store, which is the amalgamation of that reducer, basically. And then when we want to use it, we have this dispatch function that we'll eventually call with the action we are invoking, right? And these eventually make their way to that reducer. The reducer does its fun work here. We can go ahead and switch on our action type, right? So remember, right back in here, we have, you can see, we're dispatching this object with a type. And here we're switching on that actions type. So this is the action that's being passed right here. We can determine what that type is and then determine how to change the state, right? So I know this is some elementary review right now, but I just want to beat it into your heads that this is how it works. Redux itself really isn't that complicated at its heart. It's a little complicated to hook it all up. There's a lot of boilerplate, which is what people don't like about it, but it works surprisingly well when you know how it works. Now, one of the big drawbacks, again, to Redux that I probably mentioned last time, and I'll mention again, is people implement it kind of different ways, right? So, effectively, it ends up being a reducer function that you pass into this create store that switches over the types, but there are like a million ways you can actually write that in JavaScript because why not, right? It's JavaScript, and people do. So I know at Axosoft this had a very different shape to it. It was much more confusing, in my opinion, than just this raw switch statement, but you can do it. There's also combining reducers, which I guess we could talk about a little bit today too, which is where you take multiple trees in your state and you can combine them together and you can kind of split this reducer out to make it more isolated and it's not just one giant switch statement, which is pretty nice. Alright, so once we have our store right here plumbed into our provider, we wrap it around our app, and our app has the ability to kind of hook into that implicitly, which is nice. And to do that, we have this connect function that we have to import from React Redux. Connect takes in two functions itself, map state to props and map dispatch to props, and returns another function that then takes in your component, which returns a new augmented component that can talk to Redux. So map state to props takes in, it's a function that takes in state. So what it's going to do is effectively call that redux.getState, right? Do we all remember the getState function that returns state at the current time so you can inspect it and do whatever you want with those values? This effectively calls that for us, and then we can map it to whatever we want, and it's going to turn it into props in our component. So see here, we have a count. We mapped from the count. Dispatch to props does effectively the same thing, but it allows us to call that dispatch function. So these are the actions that you actually invoke against the Redux state to change it. So if we look in here, we actually have an on increment and an on decrement click in our props, this.props, right here in map dispatch to props. So it returns an object that gets added to our props, right? So we add both of those in, we wrap our component in that, and we have this magical Redux land where we can just change state. So that's our blast review. Any questions on this before we go ahead and try to add some stuff to it to make it more fun, more sophisticated? All right. Why don't we get it running, make sure it's working, and we'll add some more interesting stuff to state. Nice, that's pretty swell. Okay. So what's an interesting thing to add to state? Maybe a form, right? So forms are a lot more complicated. We did that with our raw Redux state example, where we took the form and then on the handlers, the click handlers or whatever, on the change handlers, we would change state. We can do that same thing now with Redux and React. So the first thing we want to do is probably build out our component so we have an idea of what this component's got to look like and how our state's going to need to change. So we'll call it form.js, import React from React, import connect. Whoops. We're going to need to import connect from React Redux. So this one of the things you can do with Redux that you can't do with regular React is you can still use state with just a functional component, right? Because React Redux injects all of your state and all that stuff as props, you now don't have this need to have stateful components everywhere. And this is one of the things people like about it, is you can just connect everything and then you don't have state anymore. It's just kind of the connected components. So we can make our form React. We'll call it React form so React doesn't get upset with us, because it might. So here we'll have a form. We're not quite going to be able to do stateless. We can do stateless, but we can't do it without a class because we have some functions we need to pass in. Well, yeah, we'll worry about lifting it later. So I was thinking about like the on changes we could technically do from. Okay, we can do those from the dispatch props. All right, I'm just working through the problem in my head right now. Okay, so we have a form. Let's make an input. Its type is going to be text. We'll make its name first name, and its value is going to be props dot first name. Okay, so we already know that this is going to have a first name, so we can go ahead and destructure it. So this is how we want to typically pass our props into specifically functional components, is we want to destructure them. And when you start using ESLint a lot, as Adam found out today, it's going to pretty much always tell you should destructure. And that's a general best practice in the community. The reason why is you don't have to go through so many levels, right? I don't got to do props.whatever, props.whatever, props.whatever. I kind of have them as variables. It makes them a little bit cleaner. And it looks more like an actual function where you're passing in different arguments, right? You're not really, you're passing in one object, but you don't ever pass that stuff in. React does it for you. And the last thing we have is we have an onChange handler, which we will call on, I'll call this onInputChange, which we obviously don't have defined anywhere yet, but we're going to. Cool. So that is our simple form. We'll do a button. We'll make this a submit button. We'll call it save form. And this is going to have a click handler on it. On save form. We'll call it on save form. I'm actually going to add click. So I know that there's going to be an event passed in. Because we don't have any strong typing, we're really reliant on the names of things in React. Until we add React prop types or TypeScript or Flow or something that can give us like typing, we're really reliant on just naming things well and making them discoverable in that regard. And that's hard to do. It's very hard to do. So I'm going to try my best, and we should always try our best to give things very proper names. So I'm calling this on save form click because it is clicked on the same form button, and we want to know that it's a click handler, so it takes in an event, does something with an event, right? So we're going to have to handle that. So that's kind of my logic behind it. All right, so we know we're going to need 3 different props. We got to get them somehow. Well, we have this connect function. React form that will eventually return our React form, but now we need to map state to props and map dispatch to props so we can actually do something with it, right? So if we remember again, the map state to props allows us to take anything from state and turn it into props. Dispatch to props allows us to create functions that are going to dispatch actions and turn it into props. So we obviously need to dispatch some actions. We need to dispatch when something changes, right? So we can know what to update in state. And we need to dispatch when we hit the save form click, so we know that we can now save state, right? Do something like that. And then we're going to need to get the first name right now from our props. So we don't have any of this stuff set up. So I can do const map state to props just fine. And I can go ahead and do a state. But I don't really have anything I can get from state yet that maps to the first name. Which is a bummer, but whatever, right? And then we're going to have map dispatch to props. Alright, so we already know in here, before we add stuff to our reducer, before we go ahead and add that stuff, so we have a state to be able to use, I'm going to just start to mock out these functions. So I have an idea of what I want to do. Now again, is this the best way to go about developing it? For you guys, I would think so. This is probably going to be the best way because you can come up with your components at once and think about all the things you're going to need in that component at one time. When you have a little bit more experience, you'll kind of have an idea up front, and you can do some of the stuff up front, right? You can start plumbing Redux up front, but you don't want to do too much plumbing until you know what you actually need, right? And then it's a lot of boilerplate with Redux, so you might as well figure out everything you need first and then plumb it all in. Okay, so right here, we're going to have our on input change, which is going to be a function. It's going to take in an event, and it's going to call dispatch type. We'll say input change, name. I think it's e.target.name, and value e.target.value. So we don't have this yet, that's okay, and we could potentially change this to be other stuff, but this will work fine for now. And we can actually, yeah, that's fine. So the other one we're going to need is on save form click, which is also going to take in an e, and we know we're going to have to call prevent. I think it's prevent default, right? I'm literally forgetting. We had 2 weeks off. I can't even remember. And then we're going to have to dispatch something. That'll do something. I don't know what it is yet. We'll figure it out, but it's going to do something. Okay, so now we know we're going to need some first name from state. We're going to need a couple of actions to kind of make things work. Cool. So why don't we go back to our store? The first thing we want to add is first name, which we'll just set as a blank string. And then we're going to need some actions. So here's the thing. I have this first name that's going to change when we change our input. I'm presumably going to display it somewhere. And then when we save our form, we're going to have to display that somewhere, right? So there's going to be two pieces to our state. One, there's going to be the intermediate state, and then there's going to be the final state. So I can actually make this a little bit more robust. Intermediate. So now this is going to be an object, actually. Final. It's a little bit more fleshed out. It's more complex for sure, but we can do that. We have the ability. All right, so let's go look at our actions. What did we call them? I'll open that there. And in here, we'll open our actions. So we have an input change. Form actions. Export const. And then we have this other one, form save. Now form save, input change is going to be the one that changes our intermediate value, right? And form save is going to change our final value. Now there's other ways you can make this more fancy, but let's keep it simple, right? We're just going to change those objects. We're not going to do any weird generic voodoo to make it happen automatically, which we could do, sure. All right, so let's import the actions in here just to get it done with. Import. Input change. Form save. Okay. All right. Is everyone with me so far as to what I have done? 55, how are we feeling? Mostly pretty good. Let's go.
Can't read the board either.
Can you? Are you watching the stream on your? We'll make it bigger for you at least. Hopefully it's not too fuzzy, because then it's just. All right. So we have our actions ready. We have our dispatch set up. We can see that our dispatch is. Pretty complex for this one, for this on input change. It's okay. All right. So in here we have 2 more that we can add. Case actions. Dot. Nope. Input change. I'll edit that in a moment. Actions, form save. I'll edit that in a moment as well. Alright, so we should be able to work with those actions. Now let's look again at this form one. Okay, so the form save might be easier. So what do we want to do? We want to take whatever's in this intermediate, we want to move it to final, and then we want to clear intermediate again to its default state. So this one might be better served as a function, actually. Save form state action. And we can actually just do this. We're not even going to need the action. We already have the action, right? And there's no data being passed from that action. So here, what do we need to do? We're going to need to first copy over the state. And then we want to take the final, copy over the state.intermediate, and then intermediate is going to be the default state.intermediate. Boom. That's our entire copy function. So lots of dot dot dots, lots of spreading going on. That's pretty exciting. So can anyone tell me what's going on in this function? So what does the object spread do? Anyone remember that?
Copy the state.
Copies.
You're copying the state into a new object named final that has a state of intermediate, or you're saving it to state of intermediate.
So the object spread copies the properties and the values from the first object into the new one, right? So this curly brace right here and this curly brace right here denote the new object. It copies everything from there. And then what it's saying is we're going to overwrite the final value. So we're going to create a new object in final, and we're going to copy all of the properties from the intermediate object in the current state into the final. Since they have the same first name for last name or whatever, it's just a simple copy, right? We don't got to change anything. But we could easily change that. I'm going to write this in the more verbose form in a moment. And then we're going to take the intermediate state and we're going to override it with the original default state here. So we're just basically going to blank everything out. So remember, it's copying all the properties. So in the first case, imagine this is what our state looks like. It's copying all these values from this first state and putting them into this new object. Then we're saying, oh, for final, we're actually going to go override final and replace it with whatever's in the state intermediate. And then for intermediate, we're going to override that and put whatever's in here. So what does this look like if we didn't do it without the spread? Because this is a bit more advanced, but you'll see it. You're going to see stuff like this a lot. When you get out into real-world JavaScript, right, working on a team, you're going to see this stuff. And it gets particularly hairy when you get those devs who think they're very clever. They'll come up with some real weird ways to do this that don't make sense, and you're just like, why? Why on earth would you do that? But they'll do it. All right. So first thing is, so this top one I'm doing, this underscore save form, is going to be functionally equivalent to this bottom one I'm doing, but I'm going to write out all the steps of what JavaScript's effectively doing for you. So the first thing we're doing is creating this new state. It's just an empty object. Boom. That's what this curly brace and this curly brace represent. The next thing we want to do, new state.count equals state.count. Right? So we have count. New state.intermediate equals state.intermediate. New state.final equals state.final. That's the next thing it does. That's represented right here. Boom. Same as it's just a lot more terse, right? And you can imagine if you have 50 properties in here, you certainly don't want to do this. I don't. The next phase is saying, okay, well actually, new state dot final, we're going to equal a new object. And new state dot final dot first name equals state dot intermediate dot first name. First name. Same as final. That's what this is saying. Notice the order that I'm doing these in. If I were to do this first, which I could do, I would have to move it up here, and then I would overwrite whatever I did right here with the state final, right? Now what we're doing is new state dot intermediate equals a new object. New state dot intermediate dot first name equals default state dot first name intermediate dot first name. And then last but not least, that is the functional equivalent to this. In way more words. So now you can see, does this make more sense what the spread is doing? The simple spread's probably easy now. You're guys like, I get the simple spread, but why the hell am I spreading inside of the other ones? Why am I spreading inside the final and spreading inside the intermediate? For a couple of reasons. One, the spread only works on the immediate level property key value, right? So when I spread, I'm getting a new object right here. I'm spreading into a new object, but the intermediate is the same intermediate from the original state, and the final is the same final from the original state. It does not copy those as well. It only does the first level. And then I'm like, well, I need the second level too, because I need them to be unique. So this one's going to change, so I need to spread inside of that as well. And I'm overriding what we did up here by doing it after, right? So by doing this final spread after, I'm overriding what we did the first time. And then by doing the intermediate spread last, I'm overriding what we did to the intermediate the first time. So that's what we're doing with all this crazy spreading stuff. It's pretty terse right here, though. Actually, this is one of the things about JavaScript that's quite amazing. This is what makes JavaScript awesome, is stuff like this. Without this stuff, JavaScript would be really bad, just awful. So what do? Well, on our form save, we can now just return save form and pass in our state. Boom, now we've got our new state. Everyone with me on this? Fist 5, fist 5? Everyone seems a bit sleepy today. I know I was. And then I chugged a bunch of cold brew. Now I'm not so sleepy. Okay, so what do we gotta do? We gotta change the input, right? So let's do input, change. This one's gonna take in a state. It's also gonna take in an action. So this action is far more sophisticated, right? It's got a name and a value. So we can go ahead and actually, why don't we just destructure this? So we have our state and a name and a value. There you go. We've got to spread our state. Remember, we need to copy all of that stuff. And then this one is supposed to change our intermediate values while we're waiting to save, right? So we need to change our intermediate. We just need to go ahead and copy everything. I know we only have a first name right now, but if we had 20 different properties, right, we would only be changing one at a time. We don't want to update all of them or blank the rest out or something like that. We need to copy their original values over. So now we can do name, value. And then from right here, we can go ahead and call input change state action. Does anyone remember what this does? Takes that value of the name parameter right there, and it dynamically turns it into the key in that object. So if this name comes in as first name, it's going to find the first name property on the object, the intermediate object, and it's going to change the value of it to be whatever's in that value. So this is all very dynamic, right? So the functional equivalent to this one, so you can see, over state, we have our action. Alright, so we copy over all of the stuff from state. We actually don't have this anymore. So now what we're saying is we have the state intermediate is going to equal the new object, and then it's going to equal the same as the current state's intermediate, right? So we're copying all the values over right here. And then it's going to say new state dot intermediate action dot name equals action dot value. So that's what is happening in the second one. Make sense? Anyone need more clarification on it? This is pretty dense stuff, but you're going to see it in the real world. And since we don't have a specific instruction set or timeline, I can kind of tangent off into these things that you're going to see. Because I can guarantee you, first day on the job, you're going to see something like this. Absolutely guaranteed. Alright, so now we have a reducer set up. So these bad boys should work. Alright, so what do we want to do? Well, right here, we're going to want to get our first name out. And that's going to be in state intermediate dot first name, because that's where it is in state, right? Intermediate, just make sure I spell it right. First name. That's going to translate to this first name right here in the props, so then the value can be updated. Looking good? Cool. So, in our app, now what we want is to display the final name and our form. So right here, we can call this first name. And this is actually going to come from state.final.firstName. First name. We're really happy. Because we only want that final one, right? So right here, I'm going to p-tag first name. And this is going to turn into this props.first name. Now we need to import our form. That form. Let's see what we got. See if I have an error. Nice. It's ugly. Now you can see it's all hooked up. Now if we look at the source code as it's being called. Oh man, I don't have the Redux stuff set up. Let's look at the source. Okay, so in the form, we should be able to follow this. So right here, we're going to go ahead and boom. We type A. A is registered as the onChange handler right here, right? And that's this. On input change, on input change, on input change. It's passed in through the map dispatch to props. We get this E back. And E is going to represent our control. So eTarget name is first name and the value is A. So we'll let this dispatch. We'll go ahead and F8 through it. Our action type is now input change. Which is going to trigger this input change function. And you'll see if it breaks. Oh, nice. Polyfills. Should have our state, which has an intermediate value of nothing and a first name of this crazy thing, which you can see is still on the screen. Our name is first name, our value is A, right? So we're here now. So this is all working. We'll just quickly go through it. Now if I add something else, our value is AN. If I break here, I can actually hover over the state and you can see that our intermediate right now is currently A. Our final is DS, DF, DSA, whatever, right? So you can see kind of how this is changing. I F8 through it, it's going to change. I'll do this again. You can see my state. My final state has not changed yet. My intermediate change is waiting for the next change, which is coming through this action. And then when I click Save Form, here we go. We're in the Save Form. It's not going to do anything too fancy. We're in here. Our final, and our intermediate have not changed yet. They're what we should expect. If we go back in here, everything updates on the screen. I'll click A again just so you can see that the final state is now different. Boom, boom. Magical Redux. Would you like me to continue? Would you like to work on your projects? If we continue, I'm just gonna add another control, and we'll keep on chugging through. What was that? Okay. So why don't we add another control then? Why don't we break this up a little bit? Show you what it's like when we compose stuff. So I gotta go to the Redux. Hold on. I'm gonna go to the Redux.js docs because I'm looking for a specific function that I want to use. Search. Combine reducers. Alright. So, say we want to take a bunch of reducers and we actually want to split them into different files and all that fun stuff. We can build separate reducer functions, and we can use this combine reducers to build a master reducer that effectively does what our switch does now. Now it's calling these sub functions and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, but we can split it into different files and make it a little bit cleaner because we don't necessarily want one giant store file. We can imagine as we get a really large state and things start to get pretty crazy, this gets unmanageable. You know, having it in one file, one switch statement, it gets a bit wacky. So we don't necessarily want to do that. So what we're going to do now is create a new folder. I'm going to call it my form folder. And in here I'm going to have form actions. And I'm going to have my form reducer. Now this one is going to look a lot like this. Very, very similar. So we want our default state. And I'm just going to take our regular actions. I'm just going to copy these over. I'm actually going to call it default form state. And in here, we're going to import our form actions. So this is going to be a bit of a refactoring effort. I'm going to copy these. And I'm going to export const reducer. And from our store, we need to take that. What? I probably won't have to actually put it in either one because of how combined reducer works.
Oh, okay.
But we can if we want to, and in this case we will, just to be proper. Okay, so this reducer is good. We'll call it form reducer. So notice this is just like our last stuff. The only difference being it's in its own file, right? It doesn't have any of that counter stuff in. Not that counter is very intrusive, but what if we add a bunch of other stuff later, right? So I'm going to create a new folder called counter. I'm going to create the counter actions and the counter reducer. So counter actions, pretty fun. Let's take them. And I can actually delete the actions. No need anymore. And we can go ahead and copy this to our counter. Oops, that's our counter reducer. From counter actions. So we're going to call this our default counter state. All right. Export const counter reducer state counter state. So now in here we can copy the switch. And we'll just go ahead and do default return state. So now we have two separate reducers, just completely separated from each other. The actions are separated, they're on their own files, they're nice and tidy, right? So obviously more is going to have to change, but we'll get to that. And you know what, I can keep this actions.js, and I'm actually going to export actions. Form actions, import star as. So I'm actually going to export all of the actions into this file now. And export them directly out. Okay. So we don't need the actions from here anymore. But what we need is our reducers and our default state. So we have our counter. So we have our counter reducer. We have our default counter state and our counter reducer. We also need to import our form stuff. Form form reducer. We'll have a default form state in our form reducer. And then right here, I want to combine reducers. So our default state is now a combination of our two substates, right? So our substates in their files right here, they're just like before. They're just an object that represent that default state. But now we're combining them into a parent object that has all of those at a root. Combine reducers is a function that takes in an object that will have different property names for each different reducer, right? So in this case, I have counter. Counter is going to map to the counter state. So when I'm running my counter reducer, it's only going to get that piece of the state that it actually needs, which is the counter state. It's not going to get the entire state tree anymore. And what that does is it makes it easier and more isolated for my individual reducer pieces. I can actually take any individual one and turn it into its own complete store with just minimal effort, right? Because they're so isolated. And I'm just using this one store.js file to kind of put everything together. So we have our reducer here, and we actually pass our default state in as a second parameter. This unknown action, we can just comment it out for now. So now what I have is all of that's combined. Obviously there's some changes I have to make though to the state that I'm pulling stuff from. So if I go back to my app.js, the count is no longer in just the raw state. It's now in the counter substate. And the final is no longer just in the state, it's in the form substate. If I go to the form, form is going to be the same way. It's all in the form substate. It should, in theory, still work unless I mess something up. Decrement is not exported from actions. Yes, it is. So we're just going to delete that. This is going to be from form/form actions, and app is going to be from counter/counter actions. So now if I go, it still works okay. Everything is hunky-dory. Sweet. So our refactoring worked. And now we have this combined kind of, or this isolated system of building new reducers that are kept away from each other. And then we have one elegant way where we can add them all together and build one mega reducer. So this is how you split reducers with Redux. So this is when you get to an actual complex app, you're using React Redux or Redux in general, it doesn't matter, and you want to split stuff up to make it a little bit more manageable. This is how you do it. So say you're building out your app into a set of domains. So you have your user domain, your inventory domain, your ordering domain, whatever. You'll have a different reducer, set of actions and all that for each one of those. And you can kind of keep them isolated, keep everything in one folder together that has to do with that domain without bleeding into everything else. It's a nice mechanism for that organization.
So can you have a store and insert in the server side and pass it through to the client React?
No, you cannot. The store is...
You can't say have a state in the server and change that state from the client.
You would be doing, you know, GET request. You'd update your client-side state, and when you changed the server side, you do a POST request. However, happening on the server is unimportant to the client. But that's what you're doing to change, you know, the database or whatever, right? So, sure, your server can have state, but it's actually even more dangerous to have state on your server. It's preferable to have it on the client. Your server should be as stateless as possible. Yeah, if you had authentication, if that's what you're thinking about right now, you'll always have the token stored in Redux for the client or in local storage. Local storage usually. And then they can put it into Redux when you load the page, and then you pass it on each request. Alright, so in this form, we have a last name that we wanted to add now. This should be pretty easy. We'll just add a last name, which is going to be effectively the exact same, except we have this last name. And then in our app, we want to do the same. So we're going to pass the last name. And right here, we'll just call it name. And we'll fix this typo. And hopefully, didn't like that, did it? There you go, now I have both, right? So, we've added a second property to our form. That is also passed through to state, which we can see here.
So we could also make it to where it doesn't reset the first name's state default state until last name's state.
Yeah, or you could, yeah, you could definitely do that. So you could do, oh, this is dispatch. So you'd have to be a little bit more, you'd have to kind of move up where the action happens, basically. So right here we'd have to do E. So in here I could do E dot prevent default, right? Now it's not important that it happens here. I don't even got to pass E in, as a matter of fact. So the reason why I have to do this is I need to get, well actually no, I don't need to do this. Here, I'll show you. So this is going to have to take in E, but then this is going to take in E, first name, last name. So here I can do if not first name and or not last name, return. Does nothing now, right? So I can type in here, nothing happens. Type in here, does both. So it's kind of like my validation. So what I had to do is I have to pass the state or the props down through this function so I can actually verify against them, right? But, because there's no other way to get them, I can't actually get to state from this map dispatch props function. But yeah, absolutely. Any questions on this Redux stuff?
We've got actions.js, you had it up there briefly.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to bundle it all as a Word file, so you
Yeah.
can call that one.
Right. I was, and I could do that, but I just gave up. Usually you won't really see it that way, I don't think, because you typically, your components shouldn't be talking to a bunch of different state. They should be pretty isolated to one piece of state, and then you might have a master component that has a little bit more effect overall, but it's going to be rare. They should usually be pretty isolated to one piece of the state, so they shouldn't need to import a bunch of them. If they do, you might have a problem. Any questions on any of this? Alright, so we've been reviewing for an hour. Now I feel it's probably a good time to work on your projects. If you'd like me to continue reviewing, I'm more than happy to. What do you guys want to do? What?
Project?
One for projects.
I had something that we can review, but I don't know. I mean, we can work on projects.
What do you? Okay.
Setting up like proxy,
Setting up the proxy
the proxy service.
in the Create React app.
Yeah.
So,
Like how to understand how it works like between the server side and the React app itself.
okay.
You know, how to
You want to talk about proxy servers?
No, he wants to talk about the Create React app proxy. Well, there's a couple ways we could do it. One, we can do a simple example with it. We can pull up one of the examples and go over it again.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Whatever example we did in class that one day is fine.
Okay.
Just so I can-
So if you don't want to hear this, or you're welcome to go work in your groups, go out there, work on your projects, do whatever you want. That's okay. This is your time now. If you want to sit in, I'll continue to review stuff for anyone who has anything they want to talk about. I'll just sit up here, and if you have something you want to review, let me know, and we'll cover it. So time's yours. Do what you want to do. I'll keep recording right now while I'm talking. Okay, so let me pull up. Let me find one of those examples that has that in. That is going to be probably week 21, right? Or we're in week 20. Week 20. CDB. Control G. All right.
Also, what do you think of OKTA authentication?
Okta? It's a service. You don't need it. You'd be paying for the service.
But like,
It's like, it'll be like a GitHub third-party authentication or something like that. So, you can use it. It's fine.
I was like Googling like tutorials on how to implement like user authentication, and now everything that has to do with like Node or React is saying, hey, just use this plugin or this third-party software, set up an account, and let it rip. I was like, okay, I could try it.
Yeah, you can use it because it's a provider, right? So it does all the storing your credentials and all that for you, right? So you don't have to store any of the credentials or do anything crazy. But you can also implement it yourself, right? So
I was trying to find a way to implement it myself. I have to keep going down the rabbit hole, but I couldn't find all the top searches are just like either OAuth or there's a service called Auth0.
Yeah.
Like.
So they're like Okta, but with OAuth.
Right.
So Okta also has OAuth, and they also have SAML, and they also have a couple other things that you're not going to want to do. You're going to want to do OAuth. That's what you're going to want to do. So implementing it yourself, it's hard. It's totally hard.
I was trying to find a tutorial on how to like try to implement it yourself, but everybody's just like, oh, just plug these in and.
Yeah, no. Yeah, the tutorials definitely trivialize it. It's very difficult to understand the whole flow at first. For sure. You're not wrong about that. Okay. So, right here we have an express service, right? Nothing too crazy. And I can actually let me do the npm install, make sure it runs all the commands. So it's going to install everything for Express, then it's going to go in and cannot read property match. Shut up. Ugh. So client, yarn, make sure it's all installed. Okay, so apparently it's working. So let's do yarn start dev. Alright.
Like, how do I get it to? So I set up my package JSON, and I have essentially have an API folder in my client folder for React. but when I ran yarn start, it just says, well, it says that down there. How can I verify that? Essentially, what I'm asking, how do I verify that it is running on port 3001?
If you go to port 3001 and you get React to show up. So it's not showing up right now because we don't have the static directory set up properly. So if I do yarn start prod, it will work. And this one's just failing miserably.
Well, it's just returning the email, right?
Yeah, it's trying to return the
I
JavaScript.
guess I haven't set up the server properly yet.
So if you set up the server, all you need in the client side package JSON is this, telling you the new URL.
Yeah, I have that done. I guess my server isn't set up yet at the moment because like nothing runs on 3001.
Mm-hmm.
I'll keep going through this tutorial, and if I have any questions, I'll let you know. But like, it was just, I should be able to go to that URL and something would happen if it was running.
Or if you look at make a get endpoint that's just a simple get to some /API/echo or whatever, and that's how you can test. It's usually a good test. So this one has just a get star, but you can make a simpler one to make it easy to test against. Make sense?
Yeah.
Any of you guys have anything, or are you just hanging out because he's in your group?
Yeah,
Mike is streaming. They're streaming. Alright, I'm gonna kill the stream.
I'm trying to find a way